Hey everyone, it's Rob, and thanks for listening in today. As always, I greatly appreciate your time. My guest today is Gabe Karp. Gabe spent the first 10 years of his career as a trial lawyer. He later joined a small technology startup as one of the key executives who grew ePrize, now Merkle, into one of the top digital promotion companies in the world. Gabe then entered the world of venture capital and currently sits on the boards of several companies in the Detroit Venture Partners and Lightbank portfolios. He has negotiated business and finance deals in the hundreds of millions of dollars and frequently speaks on embracing healthy conflict, which is why we'll be chatting today. Now, he says there's no chance you can stump him in movie trivia, so listen closely to our interview on that. We'll chat about his book, Don't Get Mad at Penguins, where he writes about ways to detox the conflict in your life and business. You know, Gabe brings this message to us in a way that is easy to digest and take action on, and you'll pick up on his great sense of humor. Okay, so without further ado, please join me and enjoy my chat with Gabe. Gabe, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Great to see you.
Well, I oftentimes start my podcast with a quote, but for you, I'm going to try something different. We're going to do movie trivia.
Wow. All right.
So here we go. What flavor of Pop-Tarts does Buddy the Elf use in his spaghetti in Elf?
So I hate to admit this. I didn't see Elf.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
does this mean you don't know the answer?
That means I don't know the answer.
And yet your biography says you are a movie trivia buff
It
and
does.
ask you anything? Are you telling me I picked the one question you wouldn't have an answer to?
I mean, well, you picked a movie that is like just a blind spot I have, but
okay.
You know.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm going to go back. I had to go. By the way, the answer is chocolate.
Chocolate.
You know, so,
okay.
You know, put that up there for the future.
All right.
So I guess I'll go back to quotes. Thank goodness I had a backup.
I almost want, like, now my competitive need to get an answer right. Like, can you ask another?
maybe later. Maybe later.
Right.
Let's see how this goes.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna start with a quote then. It goes like this: anger is a potent spice. A pinch wakes you up, too much dulls your senses. And that's from the Queen's Gambit. Now, what comes to mind for you when you hear that?
So you must have read my book.
I did. Your book.
Yeah.
Because I'm holding it up. Don't get mad at penguins.
Don't get mad at penguins.
We're going to talk a little bit about that today and a lot about conflict.
Great. But I love that. I love that quotation because it hits one of the, I think one of the key drivers of conflict, of negative conflict. And, you know, like, to me, anger is actually a good thing. Like, when I'm angry about stuff, it just motivates me to fix things that are broken. But then when I fix it, I want to let it go. So it's like anger, in the right dosage, in the optimal amount, is very helpful to you. And, you know, like a pinch wakes you up.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too much anger, it becomes toxic. It could do bad things. I've dealt with people who have, you know, in business, like I used to litigate. So if I could get a lawyer or a witness angry, it was great because you kind of just watch this veil come in front of this veil of anger drop down in front of their face. And it becomes like this filter between them and the rest of the world, between their thinking mind and everything else that's going on. And they don't have clear vision. They don't have clear hearing. They don't have, you know, conscious stream of thought. Potent spice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Potent spice.
So you're right about conflict. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But the first thing I want to ask you about is, why is conflict so hard for us?
That's a good one. And that's kind of the age old question. I say two reasons: nature and nurture. I think nurture is kind of the simpler one. we're raised to shy away from conflict. You know, we soften bad news. We sugarcoat feedback. We're taught when we're little kids, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And with that socialization, we just tend to shy away from it, and we feel uncomfortable. And then in addition to that, we've got the nature piece, which is our DNA. Like, we're hardwired with a fight or flight instinct. And there's a lot of physiology behind that, and neurology, and hormones that get released in your bloodstream and all that stuff. But without explaining all of that, at the end of the day, when something happens that is like, when we encounter a conflict, we get that instinctive, that instinct, survival instinct, to either run away or fight. Middle ground, not something that we're hardwired for. Because, by the way, if you are in the jungle facing like a deadly animal, middle ground will get you killed. Like, you won't survive that. So it's a good thing. But when we're not walking out of a cave dealing with a tiger, and instead we're dealing with our, maybe our crazy uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner table, or some, annoying pain in the neck coworker, or an overbearing boss, or a really angry client, fight or flight tends to make the situation much worse.
True. Even now that we're somewhat evolved, I guess somewhat is the key word there. And we know that in leadership, conflict, is welcome. We should embrace it to a certain extent, yet it doesn't happen so much in leadership. And I'm curious why you feel that is in leadership. Why aren't we embracing it more? And is there a difference between conflict and healthy conflict?
I'll take the second question first. There's the category of conflict, and then within conflict, you've got healthy conflict and toxic conflict. And yeah, there's a big difference. And at a high level, healthy conflict is really good. It's healthy. If you think about any time in your life, personally or professionally, where you achieve something worthwhile, or you grew, you had personal growth, professional growth. It was in the midst of conflict, and probably successfully navigating conflict in a way that maybe you hadn't done before, and you kind of broke through to the next level. So it's the conflict is the hallmark of progress and success and happiness in dealing with it well. On the toxic side, conflict weighs people down. It infects relationships and organizations, and one's own mind in a really negative way. It's distracting, it's stressful, it can physically make you sick. It certainly can deprive you of much needed sleep. And when you're focused on a task at hand, the toxic conflict is going to distract your focus. So you're going to be operating at a fraction of your real capacity. On the leadership side, to that question, it's a crazy thing that happens. And I'd say it happens thousands of times every day in this country and probably around the world. A company is growing, everything, things are good. There's someone who's performing extremely well at their job. So their boss comes on, you're doing such a good job at what you're doing now. We're going to promote you into a position of leadership for which you have demonstrated no competence, you've had no training, and you have zero experience. But we're going to put you there anyway because you're doing such a great job in this other stuff. And by the way, you're not going to do the other stuff. And no one says those actual words, but that in fact is exactly what is happening. Oh, you're an awesome software engineer. You're doing a great job. Why don't you lead that software engineering team? And there's very little thought put into, well, is that actually the best move?
Right.
And by the way, oftentimes it may be the best move if you're going to support the person moving into the new role for what they need to succeed in their new role. But that is not, surprisingly, it's just not something that's thought about.
Yeah. I got thinking a little, just to go a little bit deeper about this. And I thought, I wonder why Gabe is so passionate about this. You know, where did this first hit you where you said, we got to deal with this issue?
I don't know why. I don't know what first happened. I do know that I had a career as a litigator. So I was a lawyer in court multiple times a week. And I loved it. And through a sequence of events that would take too long to get into now, I moved out of the private practice law into a startup, which was a different environment. And I had some culture shock there, particularly when it came to conflict. Mm-hmm. But what at one point, at a number of points, we were very thoughtful about the culture in our company and how we were growing it and organizing things. And I would take inventory. I would look backwards 6 months, a year, and I consciously and say, how have I been allocating my time? Like, where have I been putting my time, to figure out how I should structure things moving forward. And I just found that I was always gravitating to conflict within the company. I was in a position where if we really screwed something up as a company, it came to me, it landed on me. I would need to deal with the client and kind of work those issues through.
Because you were the chief legal counsel.
I was the legal guy. So, the legal stuff comes into it, but, I always found, by the way, that the moral obligations I felt as a business partner to our client were much stronger than the legal obligations that we had. Meaning if I adhered and held fast to the moral obligations to do what I thought was required of us to do as a company, we never even got to who was contractually required to do something, Mm-hmm. So I did approach it. I always approach it from that perspective. But then I would, sometimes I'd be on the phone with a really upset person who was upset for good reason. And sometimes I'd be getting yelled at. And while getting yelled at, I'm thinking, why am I in this position right now? Meaning, who is responsible for putting me in this position right now? And then I'd go find out, and I would go talk to someone. Hey, you made this mistake. Why did this happen? Like, why'd you do this mistake? Like, I know you're not making mistakes all the time. And then you kind of dig into, well, I did this because someone on that other team did that. Why did that person on that team do that? Well, because the people on that team, they always do that, or they never do that. And then kind of like a red flag goes up, and I would think, people aren't monolithic. People don't always or never do things. People are people. So I would realize there was a conflict there, and then I would just dig into that conflict. And I just found that I was continually out conflict within the organization to resolve it. I don't know. I was comfortable doing that. And I had the confidence that if I pulled people in the room and I would say, okay, you say she never does this, and you say he always does that. So we're not going to leave this room until we can work this out. And that was my approach. And that can be a dangerous thing to do. If you don't have a good sense of how you're going to get those two people to walk out of that room feeling better about the situation, you could make the situation a lot worse. But through some simple but very effective tools, you can get the confidence to do that.
Yeah. And you write about a lot of this, and you also write about your dad in your book. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your dad's impact on you and this work.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. So my dad was also a lawyer, and, growing up, he's my dad, right? I mean, good relationship, but at the same time, like teenagers don't get along that well with their dads. And it's like, oh, your dad. And, I remember thinking, I don't know who, like a Mark Twain quote or something like that. Someone had a quote that said, at age, 17, I said, my dad is the dumbest person in the world. And then at age 25, I can't believe how much my father has learned in just 7 years or 8 years,
That's great.
So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have worked with my father in a law firm, because I was able to see him through the eyes of his clients, other lawyers and judges. And it changed the way I viewed him and the dynamic and everything else. And he was always very comfortable in any situation. I mean, he could talk to, someone living on the street to, literally a king. I don't know if he ever actually talked to a king, but you get my point. Yeah. And he was just always very comfortable in all of those, like any walk of life. And he just had this curiosity to just understand where people were coming from. And he was pretty aggressive as a lawyer. And I definitely saw that. But he always had that curiosity under everything else. And I think that made it easy for him to, like, if curiosity was the boat that he was in, that he could take that boat into the roughest waters and it just guided him through. And he managed conflict very well. Mm-hmm. And I got to see that. And I remember seeing situations. I mean, there was a really unfortunate, someone in the law firm, she had a brain tumor and had brain, surgery. And it was a hard thing. And I remember she had come back and was recuperating. It was still unclear as to whether she was going to be out of the woods, she was out of the woods. And we're all kind of standing around, and it was just very tense. Everyone kind of felt bad what to say, this and that. And my dad just walks up and says, and we start talking, and he said, "So how you doing?" She's kind of gave an answer, and he just says, "Yeah, I must have scared the shit out of you, huh?" And just everyone starts laughing. He broke through whatever that was. And it just, I don't know why that has stayed with me, but that was a moment where the whole energy in the room just flipped immediately through one comment. I mean, he basically said what everybody was thinking, and he said what everyone needed to hear. And I saw I appreciated the power that can have in any dynamic, in a healthy, helpful way. Mm.
I also read that in the 60s, he went to Mississippi to defend civil rights.
He did. Back in 94, it was, I think they called it Summer Freedom. So for history, there's actually a movie called Mississippi Burning with Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman and a number of other people. There's a true story. There were 3 kids from the North, like Chicago, and two white guys and a black guy. And they had gone down to Mississippi and there were lots of other people down there who were registering black people to vote. And those 3 kids were pulled over at night for some routine traffic stop and by the local sheriff. And that was the last time they were ever seen alive again. So it was a very dangerous time for civil rights workers in the South, very scary time. And my father he was a very young lawyer, and he and a group of other young lawyers went down to help not only register people to vote, but to help all the civil rights workers who were getting in trouble with local law enforcement. And the local sheriffs did not like all these Northerners coming into their small towns in Mississippi. And it had to have been terrifying and frightening. I remember my dad told me the first night he got down there, there was a group they had rented a house, and some others had gotten there a few days earlier. So the house was already rented. He gets there, and they're kind of just getting settled. And he said it had just turned dark, and the phone rang, and someone answered the phone, and the person's face just went white, and they hung up the phone. And they said, "Who was that?" And they said it was some guy who said, "We're going to come there and kill all you N-word loving sons of, at midnight."
Jeez.
And that was, he hadn't been there for more than an hour when that had happened. And they stayed, and they did it. That was,
that had to be a rough night's sleep.
Yeah.
That night.
Yeah.
Jeez, what an amazing guy.
Yeah, that was proud to learn about that many
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wondered, we were talking about anger earlier, and I wondered if in your household growing up, you used the shopping list voice. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the tools I think to help keep conflict in a healthy zone is to match to really watch your tone of voice. You know, when we get angry about things, we get amped up, so we yell. You know, some people say, "Well, I'm not yelling. It's a very effective use of volume." You know, but people get pissed off and they go and they just unleash that anger on whoever they think is responsible for making them pissed off. And that triggers the other person into a defensive posture. Maybe you trigger a fight or flight response, and it's just going to escalate. It goes from bad to worse. So one way to avoid that is what I call the shopping list voice. And I always like to give an example. So bear with me while I kind of run through this. So let's say I'm on the phone with a client who is terminating its agreement with my company because someone on my team screwed up, and I'm pissed. And I should be, because that's a natural human reaction to getting really bad news, especially when it's someone's fault. So I slam the phone down, I march over to this person in front of everybody, and I'm not going to do it full volume here, but, you know, and I say, "Hey, I just got off the phone with the client. They said you sent deliverables with mistakes in them. They had to redo all your work. They missed the deadline as a result. And guess what? They fired us. Like, that's a $2 million a year account that's no longer a client to this firm because you can't figure out how to do your effing job and get your head out of your, you know," boom. So that's one way to handle it. Mm-hmm. But that's not leadership. That's just me beating up on somebody. You know, that's just me being a jerk. That's weak. And that's definitely not feedback. And it is important that person get feedback immediately, like the sooner the better. So I use the term shopping list. Let's say you say to me, "Hey, Gabe, I'm going to the store. You want me to pick anything up?" I say, "Sure, Rob, I want to make a cake. So could you get some eggs, flour, milk, sugar, frosting, and sprinkles?" It's you get it. Shopping list voice. Same tone of voice you'd use to give driving directions to your house before people had Waze and Google Maps. So apply that to this situation. I just got off the phone with the client. They said you sent deliverables with mistakes, and they had to redo your work, and they missed a deadline as a result. And they've terminated their agreement with us, and that's a $2 million account that we no longer have. And scene. So, you know, the substance of what is both examples is identical. But in the first scenario, the person probably stopped listening to me 2 seconds into the tirade. In fact, there were probably things happening inside that person's brain that literally prevented them from processing the words. And in the second one, they definitely didn't like what I was saying, but at least they heard every word.
Right.
And that it's important to give that kind of feedback as soon as possible. So I've told a lot of leaders, and I've gotten feedback later on, like, "Hey, that shopping list voice really works for me." I say, you know what? When you got to give feedback like that, deliver it in a shopping list voice, but you're angry. So you got to vent the anger first. So squeeze a stress ball or punch a pillow or count back from 10, or just breathe, or do nothing. Do whatever, you know, there's lots of things you can do. There's a great book called Do Nothing that I think gives you really good tools to teach that. But if you practice giving the message in the shopping list voice first, and you can do it, great. If you're unable to maintain a shopping list voice, even during your practice, don't give the feedback because you ain't ready. Like go to the batting cage or, you know,
get it out.
Yeah, get it out. Do some jumping jacks.
Whatever it takes. Okay, movie trivia question number 2. What is the real name of Uma Thurman's The Bride character from Kill Bill?
It starts with a B, right?
That's right. I heard you almost say it. I was excited.
Yeah. Beatrice?
Beatrix Kiddo.
Beatrix Kiddo.
Good job. Good job.
All right.
I was hoping you get that because there's some references in here, which I want to talk about right now. Because you write about these 5 danger traps of conflict, the bully, the need to win, the liar, avoidance, and judgment. And I want to talk about the bully for a second. That's your first one, number 1. And first, maybe what's this all about? And then I love this example that you use in the book of Uma Thurman and Quentin Tarantino's movie, Kill Bill Volume 2. It's such a great story. So maybe you could do both of those. What's the bully all about? And then talk a little bit about that story.
Sure. So the bully trap is, I'll define it as when bully-like behavior has the unintended consequence of either shutting down communication or causing someone to retreat from a situation or causing someone to do something that they really shouldn't do. Not to be confused with bullying. Like on the playground, some bully goes and steals the lunch money. I don't call that the bully trap because the bully intends to do something and is actually doing it. In this situation, we're talking about a situation where people don't want to be a bully, but their behavior is perceived as bullying behavior. And, it's like, it's hard for us to admit, but sometimes we may be perceived as a bully in someone else's eyes unintentionally. And what gives rise to the bully trap are feelings of anger and fear. Those are 2 big drivers of it. So anger, that potent spice. Same thing with fear. Fear can be healthy in many situations, but too much or too little fear can get you into trouble, and too much fear quickly translates to anger. So the set of Kill Bill 2, actually, I think they shot the entire epic in at one time, but there's a scene that appears toward the end of Kill Bill 2 where Uma Thurman's character is driving down a dirt road in a convertible, and the camera's mounted on the back of the car, and we see her hair blowing in the wind is in the back of her head as she's driving along. And anyone who's seen the movie has seen the shot. But what many people don't know is about the story about shooting this day, the day they shot that scene. This was this might have been the last or second to last day of principal photography shot on the scene. They were on location in Mexico. The movie was already over budget and behind. And the pressure was on to just wrap this up and get it going. So what happened on the day of shooting is that Uma Thurman said she wasn't comfortable driving the car. It turns out I think she's not a very comfortable to begin with. She's actually pretty tall. This was a Carmen Ghia, a special convertible. It's a small car. So when she sat in it, like her knees were pressing up against the steering, the dashboard and the steering wheel. And it had been converted from a stick shift to an automatic. There was a heavy mounted on the back of the car, weighing the back down. This was a Hollywood car, not meant to be driven on public roads. And she just asked if a stunt driver could do the shot. And when Tarantino found out, he was furious. That was the word she used to describe him years later, talking about what had happened. And I can imagine, right? I'm Quentin Tarantino. I'm already behind budget. I'm already late. I got to wrap up photography. There's not enough time in the day to go get a stunt driver right now because it was late in the afternoon. The light was probably perfect for what he wanted. And there just wasn't time to go get a stunt driver. And he had already cut some scenes from the movie that he wanted to keep. And I imagine you make a movie, it's like, it's your baby, you don't want to start cutting things out of your baby. So he just wanted to get the shot done. So he goes to her trailer and she said he was furious. And he said she was costing them time and money. He assured her the car said, all you got to do is drive down a straight stretch of road and it'll be easy. He said, but make sure you hit 40 miles per hour. Otherwise your hair won't blow the right way. And I'll make you do it again, was one of the directions. And he said, it's just a straight stretch of road. And she relents. against better judgment, she does the scene, and there's actually raw footage. And I have the footage, I've seen it, and it's pretty frightening to watch, to see her driving down the road, and it's more sand than dirt. And it's not straight. There are curves in it. And you see Uma Thurman struggling with the steering wheel as it veers off the road and crashes headfirst into a palm tree. And, you talk about negative conflict. She suffered a concussion and permanent injuries to her neck and knees. As a result, talking about it years later, she said that was a death box that I was in. And she was furious, and it forever tarnished the relationship that they had working together, because they had done Pulp Fiction before. I mean, they were kind of a force in Hollywood, an excellent working relationship, and a trust was broken. And even years later, Quentin Tarantino said, and he says, by the way, I wasn't furious. I didn't scream at her. Maybe I could see, maybe I rolled my eyes or something like that. But I let her get into that car. It was my job to protect her and keep her safe. And I failed to do that. And it's one of my biggest regrets. He's very clear about that. And I think we don't know what happened in that trailer, but we definitely know that she believes he browbeat her. She used the word furious to describe him. And he felt, and she felt that she had no choice. And by the way, one thing I didn't even tell you was that a member of the crew had told her the car wasn't safe. That was another piece of it. So one of the lessons from this, I think, is that, let's say two lessons. One, it's okay for certain things to be non-negotiable when it comes to your safety. And as I, and I speak about this sometimes, and most of us aren't put in physically threatening situations, but there are times when we may feel professionally threatened. And more often than not, the people putting us in those positions don't intend for harm to come to us. But by the way, if they do, then my advice is get as far away from those people as fast as possible. But most of the time we can diffuse these situations by dispassionately making people aware of our concerns. And it's that dispassionate piece that's key. That's where the shopping list can come in, the shopping list voice. And the example I used earlier was the bully needing to use the shopping list voice, so they're not a bully. In this situation, it's dealing with the bully. You can use a shopping list voice to diffuse it. And you can, so like, hey, a crew member told me that the car isn't safe. I don't feel comfortable. Can we at least explore another option? Because there were other options. They could have used a stunt driver. Tarantino could have driven the car first just to make sure it was safe. But none of those options got explored because they were pulled into this bully trap.
Right. Good. Okay, what about number 3, the liar? And just talk about how a simple lie can lead to becoming a foundation to a relationship that will likely later lead to a breakdown in trust.
Yeah, I guess I'll use a more personal one. Let's say people are on their first date. It's a blind date. And everyone, they're both trying to impress each other. And I guess she says, let's assume it's a heterosexual couple because it's easier to use the pronouns. She says, oh, I love Elvis Costello. Love his music. He doesn't ignore it. And do you like him? And then the guy, not really caring about Elvis Costello, but wanting to make a connection, says, oh yeah, Elvis Costello's great. Love him. I used to see him all the time in concert. Right. And then she's like, and it works, his line works. She feels, oh, wow, we have something in common together. And then, 6 months later, they're going strong in their relationship, and she gets him, a special edition Elvis Costello box set and he says, thanks. Oh, that's great. And then a couple months after that, oh my God, Elvis Costello's on tour. A special thing are really expensive, but let's go. We can go together. And then now he's got to say, well, now he's either just going to continue like living the lie and spending the rest of his life pretending to love something he doesn't love, or he's got to come clean.
Yeah.
And then he comes clean and he says, yeah, I don't like Elvis Costello. I made that up, and it's like, you lied to me like on our first date. So what else did you lie about? What else did you make up about, you? Because I thought I was dating someone who loves Elvis Costello. And that is really meaningful to me. Now, I'm sure she can get over the Elvis Costello piece, but there's like a little betrayal that's foundational. And it does make, and it's like, wow, you were so convincing. Like you talked about his songs, and so you don't even like those songs, do you?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just one lie; it was every time it came up after that.
It's just a rabbit hole. You talk about the avoidance trap, and a question that I had for you is, I was thinking about Elon Musk, and I wondered, how do you think his communication style is as it relates to the avoidance trap? And you might not know the answer because maybe you don't follow him, but if you do, I'd be curious about that.
Well, I mean, I do follow him. I find he tends to create conflict with cryptic statements that gets everybody up in a tizzy, like he'll say something and I don't even know that he intends for this flurry of activity to happen around it. Maybe he does. I don't know. But maybe I don't know enough about him to how he creates avoidance or how
I actually don't think he creates avoidance. Actually, I think he's very direct, and maybe he just says what's on his mind. And so I wondered, with all the attention that comes his way, and obviously there are many reasons for that, but if that is a good reason to not avoid things. In other words, he's just saying how he feels, like whether you like it or not, where he stands. You can appreciate it, whether you agree with it or not. Yeah.
So to that extent, that's a great thing. That is how you avoid the avoidance trap. I mean, because when people do avoid issues, if you and I have an issue and I don't share it with you, and I just avoid it, it's out there. And if maybe it's the way you're behaving in a certain situation, and it happens over and over again. And every time it happens, it starts to resentment can build and that sort of thing. That's bad. So with Elon Musk, I don't think that happens at all. I do. I mean, I think in his, as an operator and execution, he's like, we are driving very hard toward this deadline. Like, this is our date that we want this product launched, and come hell or high water, we got to launch it. And I know we need to launch, and I'm pretty sure he's very vocal internally of saying, if there's a problem, I need to know it immediately. Like, if there's something that's getting in our way that puts this launch date in jeopardy, call it out right now. You get the sense that is exactly how he conducts himself. Mm-hmm. What I don't know, which would be interesting to get a look inside, is how good of a job he does, in addition to saying that, making people feel comfortable coming forward with something.
Right.
Because when you don't feel comfortable coming forward, you're probably not going to come forward.
That's right. And when it comes to matters like vehicles or rockets, you got to be able to come forward. Talk about toxic judgment. You share an interesting story in the book about what happened over time with LSD and other psychedelic medications. I've read a lot about that, and maybe you could. So talk about toxic judgment, and then about what that story is all about.
Sure. So again, judgment, another one of those potent spices. Probably not the greatest analogy there, because it's not that judgment wakes you up, but the bottom line is, we're human beings. We all have judgment, and to think about where that comes from. Humans are tribal in nature. Think back to cave times where that was really helpful. What is, though, that when within moments of encountering someone else, we're just subconsciously making all kinds of judgments about that person. And because we're tribal, we're always seeking to identify ourselves with one group and to distinguish ourselves from other groups. And when we encounter someone else and we identify that person as being in another group, we create this distance, and that's a form of judgment. And oftentimes, particularly in the modern world, judgments are inaccurate. I mean, think all the crap on social media, like the political discourse. If someone expresses an opinion on a very specific issue, maybe it's something about, I don't know, taxes or minimum wage or the environment, either way, a listener of that person that will assume a whole host of beliefs that the person who expressed that opinion has about all kinds of other things, beliefs and opinions which that person has not expressed and they very likely don't have. But that's instinctual. You know, when you're dealing with like murderous tribes seeking to steal your fire or kill you or take your winter food storage, you know, better to err on the side of judgment, on false judgment. But when you're in a business interaction or that sort of thing, it's negative. And what those judgments can do is they can stop us from working with people that would otherwise be helpful to us. Example, you're on your way to the store to pick something up. I do this in the book. Let's say it's your spouse's birthday party. Like, oh my God, we got to have, a strawberry cream pie. So you run to the store to pick up whipped cream, and like people are going to arrive at your apartment in an hour. And as you pull into the store, it's a busy parking lot. And you're about to go into the parking space and some truck cuts in right in front of you and just pulls into the spot. And you're pissed and you start, judging that person. Oh, I'll bet that person beats his kids. And then you look on his, he's got a bumper sticker that says, I don't know, gun, like from my cold dead hands. And he's got a gun rack on the back, and you're thinking, wow, this person is just rude. And, but I need this spot. But screw him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind in this judgment, vent my anger and judgment on him. And then the guy gets out and he's got like, I've killed for less tattooed on his chest. He's like a 6'9" bodybuilder. And at that point, like that fear you feel is healthy. I would just drive away instead of waiting around to give that person a piece of your mind. But take that same person and let's say you're lost, you need driving directions. So you're about to walk up and then you see all these things, the gun rack, the bumper sticker, the tattoo. And you're like, I'm not gonna even talk to that person because I don't like him. I don't like what he's all about. That's negative judgment. And by the way, that person could be nice and could, by the way, know exactly the directions you need to get where it is you need to go. Mm-hmm. So that would be an example of judgment getting in the way of doing what you need to do.
Right.
Same thing with like a coworker, who's just, you kind of judge that person. Maybe that person does things you don't like. Maybe that person cheats on his spouse and you judge him negatively for that. And, okay, not, I certainly don't endorse cheating on a spouse, but if I need to work with someone and I need to we need to work together to finish a project, whether or not that person cheats on his wife has nothing to do with our project. And if I allow my judgment of that person to interfere with it, where I don't want to work with them, that's getting in the way of getting something done, something productive. It's getting in the way of me doing my own job or serving my clients' interests or making our company.
Right.
That's bad.
So talk about this as it relates to what happened over time with these psychedelic medications.
Sure.
Back in the 60s, I think, or 70s or something like that.
Yeah. So this is an example. So the examples I gave before, how judgment works sort of at the individual level, this is how it can work at the organizational or societal level. So back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was really promising and groundbreaking research being done in psychedelic medications as therapeutics and treatment. So research labs at Harvard and Stanford and other top universities around the country were getting amazing results out of using LSD primarily as a treatment for depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other things. What happened was that there were a number of things that happened that created some judgment. So number one, there was a guy named Timothy Leary, who a lot of people know as part of the counterculture, but he was a professor at Harvard and he was doing research. He was somewhat irresponsible with his research, and his controls over the research weren't that great. And he started giving LSD to students who not outside of the lab, just to go on an acid trip. And ultimately he was fired and he joined the counterculture movement. Now we're into the mid to late 60s. The counterculture movement had really gained a lot of momentum as anti-establishment. The Vietnam War was in full swing. They were against the war, and really just anyone over 30 couldn't be trusted. And the establishment didn't like the and anything associated with the anti-establishment was deemed bad and negative. They didn't like their music. They didn't like their hair. They didn't like their clothes. They didn't like their drugs. So anything associated with the counterculture movement was deemed bad. And then in addition to that, the CIA did not help matters either. The CIA had something called Project MK Ultra, where they were actually dosing American citizens with LSD on US soil without their knowledge. So literally imagine you're at the cafeteria in your office building, you're drinking your coffee, and then you go sit down, and all of a sudden your telephone just starts dripping out of your hand, or you're looking your coffee and a whirlpool opens up and there's a vortex that's like trying to suck you in. Like, that'll just freak the hell out of most people. And that's exactly what was happening. They were dosing people. And they even had something called Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA hired prostitutes to lure customers, Johns, to what looked like a normal hotel room. But this hotel room was wired up for sound and video, and the prostitutes would just basically fix a drink for the customer that had LSD in it, and they'd serve it to them, and then everybody sits back and just watches the craziness as it unfolds. Really bad, unethical stuff. Coupled with a whole counterculture movement that gave all this a bad name. And the result is, Pat, in I think 1971, passed a Controlled Substances Act that banned wholesale the possession and research of any psychedelic medication. Now, that was pure judgment. That was what I would call an overreaction to these other things that were happening, because there was nothing in the raw data coming out of clinical and lab research that suggested wholesale shutdown of all the research. But that is exactly what happened. And from, let's say, 1970 to probably 2016, 2017, you had almost no work done in this area.
Yeah.
Now, starting about 7 years ago, it started to weave its way back into the medical and clinical and research communities. And amazing results are coming out of it. And now you've got very slowly, you've got probably 5 or 6 cities that have decriminalized psychedelics, a couple that are now legalizing them. It's a minor difference between decriminalizing versus legalizing, but the bottom line is that research is now being done, and you're seeing far greater benefits and results from these substances than you're seeing with the traditional pharmaceuticals that the pharmaceutical companies have been using to sort of suppress and numb the mind, as opposed to open and expanding the mind.
I'm so glad you shared that example in the book, because growing up, that was my time to grow up. I think yours too. And I always had a judgment about those types of substances. And when this started to change not that many years ago, as you mentioned, it kind of blew my mind because I had this wiring that these were bad things. And now to see all the studying and how it's being very useful for people, it just shows how this judgment trap can go on for years and years with change of society in a way. It could have helped millions and millions of people. Maybe. I don't know enough about it all, but maybe. So thank you for sharing that. I love that.
I mean, I'll say, I remember growing up and believing that if you did LSD once or twice,
yes,
very likely you would go insane. and you would need to be institutionalized for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. There's really nothing to suggest that in the data.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. You have a great quote in the book, and it made me chuckle, mainly because of who you attributed it to. And it goes like this: between expectation and reality is a space filled with suffering and conflict. The wider that space becomes, the greater our suffering is. And you attributed that to someone who was trying to sound like a wise sage that you couldn't find who to attribute it to. But said differently, I think by a true sage by the name of Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So what are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah. So actually, I was the person trying to sound like a wise old sage.
Oh, is that you?
Yeah. I made that
fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I look at it is that between expectation and reality, that's where there's a lot of suffering and conflict. And it's most often in our expectation of another person, and we for whatever reason will have an expectation that they do or say or behave in a way that we want, or maybe even we think we need to behave. And when that person falls short of whatever that expectation is, we get angry, sad, anxious, frustrated, fill in the blank of whatever the emotion is. Mm. And I think the lesson here is that we can't control what other people do. All we can control is how we respond to it. And if we're going to feel angry, fearful, or sad because of what someone else is doing, that's on us. We have to be accountable for all of that. And the reality is we have total control over how we're going to respond to things. And I've heard people say, well, we don't have control over our emotions. They're instinctive responses. They're involuntary. And that's not true. It's just not. Now, I should clarify that doesn't mean that we can choose to never feel that initial flash of anger or fear or anxiety over what someone does. But the lifespan of those instinctive responses is measured in seconds, not minutes or hours or days or months. Yeah. And what happens after that, 100% within our control.
Yeah. So good. You write about the importance of humility in a great leader. And I love that. Seems obvious, but my question for you is, do you feel that most leaders are actually humble, or do they just think they're humble?
I've definitely heard it as as sort of this, that's what I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to tell people I'm humble. And I see people feign humility, which by the way is oftentimes better than not faking it. But yeah, I think, the humility piece is sometimes misunderstood. I don't see anything wrong with a leader who realizes that, they're able to do things that no one else in the company can do. And so they do them. And maybe they need other people to do some things, to take things off their plate, so that they're freed up to do the thing that no one else can do. And it's like, it's hard to come up with examples, but I don't know, take someone just with an assistant. Like, I need my assistant to go deal with this routine thing. Maybe it's pick up my dry cleaning. because if I go pick up my dry cleaning, that's time I'm not going to be spending doing this other thing that absolutely has to be done. And I can't delegate this thing to anyone else because I'm the only one that can do it. That scenario has really nothing to do with humility or lack of humility. Mm-hmm. That's just a very pragmatic approach to something. But where I think lack of humility and leadership does real harm is when someone believes that they've been anointed with leadership that carries with it all kinds of authority. I don't, and people may disagree with this, but if I tell someone, hey, I need you to do this, and they say, well, why would we do that? That doesn't make any sense. And my response is, you do it because I'm the boss and I said so, and you just do it. Don't question me, just do it. I don't think that's a healthy dynamic. Now, by the way, I should say, if we're literally on the battlefield, whizzing past us, we don't have time to have a debate as to whether what I'm saying is or isn't the right thing. You got to do the thing or people are going to die. So let's just cut all those types of situations out of this conversation. That if I have humility, I'm open to the possibility that what I'm saying may not be the best answer. And that will make me open to saying to the person, well, if you don't think that this is the right thing to do, what is the right thing to do? What do you think is? And then if the person says, well, I don't know, I just don't think this is the right thing. Well, then it's like, well, come on, you're not being helpful here. You need to have some humility but if you know something out what I'm suggesting that is flawed, please tell me. I want to hear that, because I care less about being right and I care more about doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's where humility plays a really important part. And when leaders lack that, well, they're bad leaders.
Yes. Yeah. Humility is not weak. It is the strongest trait a leader can have. Just treat every person on this planet as an equal.
Yeah. I would say it's the opposite of weakness.
Yes. No doubt.
I've heard political commentators talk about some, political people, and they refer to people who completely lack humility, and they say that person is a weak person's idea of what a strong person is.
That's good. I like that. Gabe, is there anything I left out or that you would like to share?
I think the idea that conflict is a bad thing is something I would like everyone to just get out of their minds. That conflict is something that we should all embrace and lean into and leverage to drive whatever progress we want to make. If it's business, if it's personal, the great thing about the concept here is that we can talk in business terms all day long, but at the end of the day, it's human beings dealing with other human beings. So whether they're dealing with one another in business or in their personal lives, in school or in the bar or the cafeteria, it's all the same patterns of conflict playing out over and over again. And the idea that conflict is a bad thing and I should shy away from it and avoid it at all costs, that's hurtful to everybody involved. And what I see now, especially because we're so polarized in social media and the news cycle, everyone feels like that we're walking on eggshells. We're trying to come out of this pandemic and kind of get back into rooms with one another. There's a fear out there of offending people. And, I think if we take the approach that, it's okay to say something that someone doesn't like, as long as I'm respectful. Don't attack people, don't attack character, attack ideas, attack process. The best example I can give of this is if I've got someone who is on my team and they have a performance issue and I need to give really harsh feedback to them, or I should say direct feedback that's going to hurt their feelings and make them feel bad about themselves, it's very easy for me to withhold that. And so I don't want to make them feel bad. So I'm not going to say anything. And then I start rationalizing. Well, it'll just resolve on its own, or, he'll figure it out. And that's avoidance, and that's bad. And I would say the irony is that out of this sense of compassion, I'm withholding information that is really helpful to this other person. And I think that's one of the cruelest things you can do to somebody. Mm-hmm. I think the idea that we're much kinder to each other if we're open and honest and direct.
That's right. Perfectly stated. Gabe, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And thanks for reading the book. I appreciate
it. Absolutely. And I highly recommend you all pick it up. It's a great read. Don't get mad at penguins, and other ways to detox the conflict in your life and business. Congrats, Gabe. I love it.
Thanks,
and
Rob.
to all the listeners, thank you as always. I wish you much love and gratitude.